Welcome to Hoop HR Highlights, a podcast brought to you by a team of recruitment professionals who are talking to industry experts about a range of topics relating to recruitment and HR. Please subscribe to us on Spotify or YouTube and search for Hoop HR Highlights. If anyone listening to this podcast has a topic that you'd like to talk about, please do get in touch. I'm Emily Summerhayes, one of the directors at Hoop Recruitment, and today I am joined by branding expert Anna Lewis, who's going to talk about why having a strong employer brand can help with recruitment and retention. As recruiters, we can tell you that there is a real war for talent on at the moment. Companies have been struggling for a while to attract individuals into roles as the benchmark for salaries has increased. There's almost an expectation now for people to be able to work hybridly, and people want to work for organisations that have a purpose. It seems that long gone are the days where work is just a place to put food on the table. And unfortunately, not every company is in a position to be able to offer hybrid working or high salaries, but every company does have a purpose. Putting that message across about your company can be difficult, and this is where having a strong employer brand can make all the difference. Anna Lewis is one of the founders of branding agency Marsden Mee. Anna's worked in branding for 21 years and has worked on projects for the BBC, PHS and Action for Children, as well as being a judge on the CIM Wales Marketing Awards. Anna's a mum of two football-obsessed girls and spends a lot of her time, like me, on the sidelines. So thanks so much for your valuable time today, Anna.
That's okay, no problem.
Fab. So first of all, can you tell me a little bit about your background in branding and your business, Marsden Mee?
Yeah, of course. So I've been working in marketing and branding related roles for, as you say, about the last 20 years. And I started off at what was the Welsh Development Agency, where I ran national campaigns to encourage and inspire people in Wales to start and grow their own businesses. It was a really brilliant thing to be a part of, and I really felt that I was doing something important and making a difference for people and communities in Wales, and yeah, I loved it. But when the Welsh Development Agency ceased to exist, I moved to work in an agency, and at that time it was one of the most sort of influential branding agencies in the region, and I spent 8 years there as head of brand strategy. And then 7 years ago, myself and my business partner, Becky, decided that we wanted to break away from there and do things differently. And we set up our own branding agency, and that was Marsden Mee. And, we've steadily sort of quietly grown over those 7 years. And as we've seen the market shift, we've shifted as a business too. And now our real specialism is helping purposeful brands or brands who would like to be seen as more purposeful to connect better with people internally and externally, and we do that through strategy and design and language. So essentially we help businesses to define their brand strategy, embed that strategy internally, design the way their brand looks to reflect that, and then help them to develop a distinctive voice and language to articulate all of that.
That's really interesting that you were saying that your focus in Marsden Mee has changed more recently, because we've noticed that branding is something that we hear a lot more about at the moment, more than I can recall sort of ever hearing about in the past. Is branding become more of a priority to businesses then in the most recent years?
I think probably the reason you feel like you're hearing more about it is because I think a lot of businesses are realizing that branding is, it's a lot more than just a logo and a few nice colors. And for as long as I can remember, we've been sort of battling against that perception, and that branding is just something looks after. It's a logo, color palette, perhaps some values stuck on the wall, but over recent years we've really started seeing like the penny drop, where organizations are finally sort of realizing the true value of a strong brand, and as you say, increasingly consumers, job seekers are seeking out companies that share their values. So they want to buy from and be part of ethical companies, ones that care about the environment, that treat their people well, ones that have a sort of greater purpose than just making money. So it's definitely becoming more important than ever for businesses to be really clear about those things, to really sort of wear their values on their sleeve, and prove that they're the type of business that they claim to be. So we've definitely seen more interest from senior leaders and directors who have had to sit up and take notice of what's going on and really just pay their brand some attention. So yeah, it's interesting that you feel like you're hearing more about it.
I think honestly it's fascinating. And can you give me some examples of well-known companies that you think have got a really strong brand?
So for me, the brands that are absolutely leading the way at the moment are the ones that are leading with purpose. So the ones that are focused on the difference that they make, not just on, the money that they make. So if you look at a brand like John Lewis, for example, so they've stopped talking about the products they sell completely. They're much more focused on the impact they make through the things like community partnerships and sustainability initiatives. That's the sort of stuff they're talking about as a brand. One of my favorite brands is Dove, and the Dove campaigns, they really started the body positivity movement, a few years ago now, but in recent years they've done a lot more as well to tackle impossible beauty ideals as well. And what that does is it builds trust with a brand, and that's what we all want, is to buy from brands that we trust now more than ever. I think another example is the banking space is really interesting at the moment. So you've got brands like Monzo that entered as a disruptor a few years ago, but crucially, sort of the way that they've done that is not just by sort of thinking, right, we want to go for a younger demographic, so we're going to look more modern and try and appeal to a younger customer. It's not just about the way that they look. It's been done incredibly tactically, built on this really strong idea. They call it radical transparency. And that idea permeates everything. So from the product itself to the customer experience, to internal comms, to, the brand voice, the way they talk, everything across the business is aligned. And that, for me, is what makes a really powerful brand, is when you see that real alignment and you can see that they're doing everything consistently.
Yeah, and it does when you see things like the adverts on TV and things like, it does make you stop and look, doesn't it?
Yes, exactly.
So I suppose practically, if somebody, if a company thought, right, actually we do need to recreate our brand or create our brand, they'd come to you at Marsden Mee. How do you go about doing that? It seems like such a complicated process.
So the people that come to us, they tend to already have a brand in place, and what they're generally looking for is some help in kind of crystallizing their brand proposition. So maybe they feel their brand isn't sort of hitting home for some reason. Maybe it's not connecting with the right people in the way they'd like it to. Maybe the visual identity doesn't represent the business properly, or they just feel like they should be articulating their brand proposition better. So, we always start with some strategic thinking around that brand proposition. And that nearly always involves research with, various different stakeholders to help us understand where things are, both internally and externally. And that gives us a really clear picture of how the brand might need to evolve. So we do desk research, we run workshops, we interview key people within the business, and then we define that brand proposition then. So at this point, we'd look at things like purpose, values, positioning, personality, all the things that build that foundation of the brand. And once we've defined those things and everyone's in agreement with that, we use that to kind of assess what needs to be done next. So, for example, we might look at the visual identity and say, well, the way we look doesn't really match that proposition, doesn't match those values and that positioning. So maybe we do need to look at a redesign, or we may look at messaging and say, actually, the things we're saying don't really communicate what we're trying to say. Or we might even look more fundamentally at the product or the service offering or the customer experience and say, do you know what we're doing doesn't match where we want to be. So it becomes a litmus test, really. And the key thing is that litmus test should be applied across every single area of the business. So, for example, if one of the values is say empathy, we need to be asking how empathy is displayed towards customers, but also towards colleagues, towards suppliers, to job applicants, to new starters, and also to the community, to the wider world. It's about really taking that holistic approach to the values and really thinking about what those values mean and how it can be lived and breathed better as teams and as individuals in the organisation. So ultimately, it's not just a word on.
Yeah.
It's a pillar that should guide behaviour within the organisation. I think.
Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that I think people sometimes find it hard to look at values and understand how they're relevant. And I think, there's sometimes they can almost seem a bit meaningless because they don't have context. So,
like you said, there's something that's written on the wall as you walk in.
We're innovative, or we're responsible, or bold. And, you think about someone, sitting behind a desk processing invoices. Well, how is that relevant to them, And I think it's understandable that they might think, well, that's not really anything to do with me. I'm not innovative. I just sit and process invoices. So one of the things that we do that really helps with that is that we develop a set of behaviours that are linked to each of the brand values. And that then becomes a behaviour framework that really helps everyone within the organisation to understand their role in delivering the brand. So yeah, essentially, it's really clear, how they can live and breathe the values through their behaviours. And then that framework then becomes the foundation for recruitment, for onboarding, for competencies, performance reviews. So that ultimately the culture of the organisation is built on those values and is really completely values driven. And having that kind of alignment and understanding makes for a really strong and impactful brand, because it's one that's, consistently delivered then right across the organisation.
Definitely. So when you're, helping a company create that brand and finding out those behaviours and those values, who is it within the organisation that you go to talk to? Is it the leaders within the organisation, or do you have do you take people from all different departments?
Yeah, so we would generally talk to people right across the organisation. I mean, it's really important that leaders buy into this process and really lead it, that they understand the importance of it. But another really important thing, and it's something that we're seeing a little bit more of now, which is really encouraging, is that collaboration between HR and marketing. Because I think traditionally, branding is sort of seen as the domain of the marketing team, and then you've got things like behaviors, competencies, culture, that sort of thing, which more typically sort of sits with HR. So in order to make those things really aligned, it's really, really important for marketing and HR to really work together and collaborate on that. So yeah, we're seeing a lot more of that actually, which is really good, because it's a really important thing. They can't really be done in isolation, because then you get that disconnect then between what's happening. So yeah, that alignment is really crucial.
Honestly, I think it's key, and we are seeing it a lot more, where sort of internal recruitment departments do have that influence. I know I recently spoke to somebody that had just been employed as an internal recruiter, and their background was actually branding, and I thought it was great, because they, the organisation were having struggles in attracting people, and where they really needed that help was around kind of putting that brand across and attracting candidates that way, which I guess kind of leads me on to the next question, which was, how can a company then, I suppose, express their brand effectively externally?
So really, it's through everything. So the obvious one is the way the brand looks, the way it talks, but every interaction that someone has with the business, whether it's on a website, through social media, via email, through customer services, packaging, advertising, everything like that. But it's also through the experience of the product or service itself. So every experience you have if you think about Apple, for example, the experience of opening the box, things like that, thinking about every sort of element of that brand experience is really important. And it's also, if we're thinking about how the brand is expressed, it's also through the other things that the brand does. So the commitments the brand makes, the causes it champions, the partners that it endorses. all of those things say something about the brand. And there's loads more that I probably haven't thought of, but it's everything, if that's not too much of a broad answer.
No, and I suppose, the consistency there is the important thing, isn't it? And just ensuring that, the way that something is expressed about your brand is the same across all of those platforms, so people become familiar with it.
Exactly, yeah.
So is there a difference then, would you say, between an external company brand and your internal company brand?
That's a really interesting question, but essentially I would say no. If you think about values as the foundation of a brand, you have to be consistent internally and externally. You can't say you're empathetic to customers but not to colleagues. You can't say you're innovative in terms of your product development and then have your people sit there with really bad hardware and software. That importance of consistency is crucial, and the more your people understand your brand, the better they'll deliver it ultimately. Having said that, you might look at expressing the brand differently internally. So obviously your people are a different audience to your customers, so they need to be communicated with differently and engaged with differently about it. So the development of an EVP or employer value proposition can be really valuable then to connect directly with existing and potential employees, and to help them understand what they'll get from working for you.
And I think it's really important as well that, a new starter with an organisation understands that brand from day one, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that it's embedded in them. How could a company express, I suppose, that brand to their internal employers?
So the best way to express a brand internally, to begin with, is through the way that they're treated. Ultimately that speaks volumes about your brand. But when it comes to articulating the brand internally, it comes back to the importance of them really understanding the brand proposition, the organizational purpose, the values, those behaviors I mentioned, so that they can feel really good about what they're a part of, so they know the role that they play in delivering on the brand. So communication about that is key, and obviously that can happen as part of the onboarding process. It can even happen as part of the recruitment process. You can start to introduce some of those values really early on in the recruitment process, and then once someone's joined the organization, communication about the values then is really important. So workshopping behaviors, bringing teams together to talk about what they can do to collectively to sort of bring the values to life. Not only does that help to embed the brand internally, but it just makes everyone feel really good about being a part of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I know that you worked with us quite closely on our branding as well, and putting our caption, we put people first always. And I think that's a really good example of that's how we work with our customers externally, but also that's what we look for in our employees as well. We need to make sure that they are people that are putting people first always, and we need to make sure that people are living and breathing that. And I suppose we've seen a difference in kind of our recruitment and retention process since having our branding work done. What ways can you see that having a strong employer brand makes a difference from that recruitment and retention perspective?
Well, I mean, you mentioned it in your introduction. It's such a candidate-driven market, and so those slightest things are going to swing the balance from one employer to another. So developing a strong employer brand, it really does make all the difference, and that's where EVP comes in. When we talk about EVP, we're sort of talking about having a really clear articulation of the promise that you're making to your people and what they'll get from working for you. So not just talking about remuneration and other benefits, although those are obviously really important. I'm talking more about what they'll get from the experience, how they'll feel a sense of purpose, what kind of culture they'll be a part of, what kind of opportunities they'll get, what life goals they'll be able to achieve beyond the job description. and as you were saying, working for a purposeful employer is really high on the priority list for many job seekers at the moment. And it's about getting more from a job than just a salary. It's about feeling that you're contributing to something worthwhile and working somewhere where you're valued and respected, and where you'll come home feeling really good about what you're a part of.
Absolutely. And I know, the NHS is a big example of, of clients that we've worked with in the past. And I know, it's difficult because a lot of their salaries are banded.
Mm-hmm.
Can't be moving around on those salaries. It's unfortunately it's non-negotiable. Then you've got kind of the fact that a lot of these roles, they are very much on site. It's not possible for these professionals to work from home given what they're doing. But the purpose is so huge. It's amazing, and that itself is something that will attract a certain caliber of candidate to the organisation.
Yeah, definitely. And when we've been going through workshop sessions with some of our clients over the last few years, and we sort of say to people, what do you love about working here? It almost always the key thing is, well, I just feel a real sense of purpose. I really feel like we're doing something really good and we're making a difference for people. And even when there's lots of other really interesting and attractive benefits that they also talk as well, really it always comes through really as a strong message when they feel that sort of sense of that they're motivated by doing good.
So how do you go about developing that EVP?
So when we sort of talk to people about an EVP, firstly, we need to understand the organisation, where it is now, and what its existing employer proposition is, including remuneration, benefits, career development, training opportunities, the environment, well-being, culture, that sort of thing. So first of all, we need to sort of get to grips with what all that looks like to begin with. We also run internal workshops then, like I was just talking about, to really get a feeling for what's important to people within the business, why they love working there, what makes it unique as a place to work, what motivates them and really gives them that sense of purpose. And we'll consider, the values and all the other things I've sort of talked about, and we'll use this then to feed into the definition of the EVP, which will be used to, attract and retain people and improve reputation and ultimately make brand advocates of your people. That's what you want. You want your people to really be strong brand advocates. You want them to be talking about your business as an amazing place to work. And in practical terms, so the EVP is it's a statement really, or a set of statements that set out your promise to your people, and then that's backed up then with a set of EVP themes and a set of proof points linked to each of those themes. So the proof points are basically the evidence, if you like, to back up what you're saying. And that process can be really interesting. So sometimes it might throw up issues or gaps where a company might like to say it's a particular type of employer, sort of like to think that it behaves in a certain way, but actually it might fall short when you actually look at whether there's proof points there to demonstrate it. So they might claim to be an inclusive employer, for example, but actually hasn't got an equality and diversity policy in place, hasn't got other measures in place to actually live and breathe that. So actually it can really help a business to become the employer that they want to be as well. And it can really just help to make that much more rounded.
I know, and I think where we've been lucky enough to work with you here at Hoop, and I've seen firsthand that journey, and it really is incredible, isn't it? Because I remember when we spoke to you first, and it was almost as if you can't see how this is going to come to light, and over time you see that brand really coming to life and becoming exactly what you wanted it to be, but we're not experts, and it's so hard sometimes to put these things into words.
Yeah, I think that's key, because I think certainly you guys at Hoop, you knew exactly what you wanted to be as a brand, but I think sometimes it's really hard to articulate it for yourselves. It's really hard to actually, and I remember sort of presenting it to Paul and Howell, it was almost like, yes, that's what we've been trying to express, you know. And I think
It's actually quite emotional, I think.
yeah,
So,
yeah, I
wow.
remember that they were a bit like that. But I think, you know, it's a really hard thing to do for yourself sometimes, I think. And, you know, it's about sort of collecting all of that information and sort of, you know, really sort of putting it into all of that. And, you know, that's what makes it really a lot clearer then to express that to other people and to really sort of make sure people understand it.
Absolutely. And can you give any examples of any of the other brands that you've created and what, you know, what kind of the results were there?
Yeah, so we've done a lot of work with Hodge Bank over the last couple of years, quite specifically on internal activation of their brand. They already had values in place, but our brief was to launch the values internally and make them really relevant to everyone in the organisation. There was a little bit of a disconnect. So internal research was showing that the people didn't really understand the purpose and the values, and they didn't feel connected to it. And people that weren't customer facing didn't really feel a connection to the customer and didn't appreciate the role that they played in making a difference for those people. So we developed an internal activation plan for them, which included redefinition of their purpose, the creation of a behaviour framework, the development of an EVP. We designed a launch campaign, delivered internal workshops, and developed a range of sort of materials, including how-to guides, language guidelines, and a series of short films as well, which highlighted the impact of everyone's work on the end customer. It was to really bring the brand to life for everyone and help everyone to feel connected to it. And the results of that it was really significant. So it's quite difficult with branding work often to actually track the impact of it. But Hodge takes part in a financial services staff survey, and that tracks attitudes across various different elements of the business. And there was a really massive increase in their scores relating to affinity with the organisation's purpose and values. And it was actually such a large jump that it put the brand in a higher quartile in the benchmarking against other firms. So they were really, really happy with that. And, you know, that work that we've done with them has given them a really solid foundation then to build on for the future. And, you know, they've sort of continued that work with embedding that into the onboarding process and, you know, in terms of performance reviews, things like that, so that it's really sort of embedded in the culture.
Well, it's interesting because I went to one of the CIM events last year and heard somebody actually who was one of the senior marketing professionals from Hodge Bank talking about the success of their sort of rebrand and actually referenced yourself. So it's fantastic. And also I remember seeing all over LinkedIn the welcome packs, which I believe that you were a part of. And it was literally anyone that sort of joined Hodge Bank posted a picture on LinkedIn. This is what I've received my first week at Hodge, and each of the items in the box were all related to their values, and it was so clever. And I remember doing some guest speaking in the university, and it was actually referenced there as well when we talked about what could people do well to you know, to onboard their employers. People talked about that particular box from Hodge Bank that they'd seen all over LinkedIn. So it'd be really interesting to hear a bit more about that. I mean, can you talk about, you know, the concept there and how that was designed?
Yeah, oh, that's really nice to hear. That's really good to hear.
And it was a good one, really good.
It was really nice to see it being so sort of well received on social media, definitely. And yeah, the sort of point you make there is the sort of important one to make really about this, is that we didn't just choose a selection of nice items and put them in a nice box. You know, every aspect of the box was designed with the purpose and values in mind. You know, we really wanted to use it to reinforce the values. So each item was chosen to reflect one of the values and to reinforce the behaviours in some way. So, for example, we had a pair of AirPods, which was to reflect the value of genuine empathy, and it had the message, listen to see and feel things as others do. And that was one of the behaviours in the behaviour framework. But obviously the listening element was connected with the AirPods, and we chose each of the items to have some sort of connection with the values in that way. So it's all connected together, and we chose all of the items with sustainability in mind too, because that linked really well with the brand's ethical focus too. And it actually went to everyone in the organisation, because it was part of this sort of internal launch of the values. And now, it goes to all of new starters, but they really wanted to show that this was an important thing for everyone, so it went to everybody, and it was a really nice way to launch the whole programme of work.
Brilliant. And for anyone sort of listening to this podcast now who's suddenly having light bulb moments thinking, actually, yeah, maybe we need to do something with our brand. How long does the process take to create a brand?
Well, creating a brand, I always think programs like The Apprentice definitely do not do us any favors. So candidates are given 24 hours to create a brand. And I think, oh my God, that's what everyone thinks. That's what everyone thinks.
Well, you should go on. You do really well.
They, what they actually do is they create a really bad logo. That's basically what they do.
Yeah.
So it doesn't happen overnight. It does take time to develop a properly defined brand proposition, and then to build a reputation and to establish trust. Building a brand isn't the same as creating a logo. Having said that, you do have the likes of Monzo that made a huge impact pretty quickly by starting a Kickstarter campaign and having a really well-defined brand proposition from the beginning. But for other startups, it'll take a lot longer to make the same kind of impact. So it's tricky. Creating a brand is can be quite a sort of a long process, but it's all about having that really clear strategy behind it before you do anything else. That's the key to it, and ultimately you'll build it quicker if those sort of key fundamentals are in place.
Absolutely. And I suppose as well, it, like you said, it's not just creating a logo, and there is so much complexities to it. So again, you can see how that link with the HR teams is so key. Especially when it's around your behaviours, your values, your people, isn't it? It's your people. So if somebody wanted to change their brand, how easy is it to do that?
Well, in some ways, and if the investment is there to do it well, it can almost be a bit quicker to launch a new brand than it is to try and change perception of an existing brand. It's kind of like the difference between a small speedboat or trying to turn a big sort of oil tanker, but it's definitely possible. It's something that we do all the time. It's definitely possible to change your brand. Naturally, the ease of that process will depend on the size of the business, the size of the customer base, and the reach of the business, and also the size of the challenge. So what extent does the brand need to change? And sometimes small changes can be sufficient. So, for example, values and behaviours might need to be reviewed, but the visual identity and logo might only need to be tweaked, or sometimes the reverse is true. And sometimes it's necessary to start from scratch and build the brand from a new strategic foundation. And that's entirely possible to do. Many brands have done that. You've got the likes of McDonald's have done that, Lego have done that. They've reinvented their brands to respond to changing consumer demands. And smaller brands can do it effectively too, but as long as there's that proper strategic thinking behind it, so that it's not just a knee-jerk reaction to the latest fad or a sort of a superficial redesign of the identity just for the sake of it. But I'd definitely say that the key to any kind of reinvention is to do it from the inside out. So you do need to start with your people, because ultimately, they're the ones delivering on the brand. So they need to be completely on board. They need to understand the reasons for any changes so that they can really get behind it, and so that they can adjust their own actions and behaviours accordingly. Leaders in the business really need to take ownership of it too. This isn't just something that the marketing department does in isolation. We've talked about that already, and it needs everyone to pull together so that the people at the top of the business can lead by example and make it feel like a really positive and exciting thing, not just something that's being, forced on people for no particular reason.
So how would you kind of, you ensure or advise that people go about getting everybody's buy-in within the company to really understand that brand? It must be quite difficult.
Yeah, and I mean, there's various different sort of stages to that process. So the first thing is understanding. So everyone in the organization needs to understand why building a strong and consistent brand is important. They need to be really clear about what the purpose and values are, what they mean, why they matter, and they need to understand that every single person in the business has a role to play in delivering on them. There's a really great story about President Kennedy visiting NASA for the first time. Have you heard it?
No.
So during his tour, he apparently, I mean, I don't know if this is a real story or not, but it's a really good story. During his tour, he apparently met a janitor and asked him, "What do you do for NASA?" And the janitor apparently replied, "I'm helping to put a man on the moon." And that's what we're aiming for. That's what we're talking about here. It's an organization where everyone gets it, where everyone feels connected to the purpose and inspired by the purpose, no matter what role they play or how far removed they might feel from that end goal. So yeah, it's about establishing that understanding. The next thing is making sure it's relevant to everyone, and that's where the behaviours come into play. So the values have meaning and that they're easy to understand and bring to life, and everyone knows what's expected of them. And it's important that the leaders champion and model those behaviours, that they use the right language, they say the right things, and they need to use their influence to get everyone on board. And then it's about embedding the values systemically then. So, they need to be linked to strategic outcomes. So the values should be directing the strategy, not the other way around. And that's quite a big shift sometimes for organizations to understand. They need to be used in the development of business processes. They need to be aligned with performance measures and also recognition. So, for example, one thing that's really powerful is to share and celebrate examples of the values being brought to life across the organisation. So that idea of sort of showcasing best practice. And sort of really talking and sharing about what people are doing brilliantly to demonstrate the values. And that really helps to embed values-based thinking in every single team. And it inspires others then within the organisation and gives them sort of practical examples of how to live and breathe it through the things that they do and say. And then finally, people really need practical tools to help them through the process. So, brand guidelines are really important. Language guidelines are important so that everyone's consistent in the things that they say, the way they talk about the brand. And we also create simple sort of how-to guides, and they sort of summarize everything I've just said in a really simple way to help everyone in the organization understand and really embrace what they're a part of. And that kind of thing can sit on the intranet. They can be given to new starters, so that everyone has a really simple reference point when it comes to all of this. So yeah, it's making sure that there's materials in place so that people feel really confident about how they can actually act on the brand and what they need to do and say to actually to life.
I think that was really interesting what you were saying about the practical tools, because I think that's what's needed, isn't it? I remember when we had our rebrand, it was just kind of, okay, how do we actually do this now? And our marketing manager was great because she would give regular kind of updates to the business in terms of, right, okay, just a reminder, this is, this is our language, this is the fonts that we need to be using, these are the tones that you need from more of your, your marketing materials and everything that was going out, because everyone's obviously got things like their own personal LinkedIn profiles, and you need to make sure that each individual's messages and everything are consistent with that brand. So we had somebody kind of policing them and saying, actually, this isn't on brand. But it's all really good, because I think, it's been a learn for all of us, not being marketing experts ourselves. But we're all definitely seeing that value. And I know when we've done some internal recruitment recently, a lot of the, one of the questions is, why would you want to come and work for us? And a lot of it is to do with our brand and how we're, I suppose, marketing ourselves externally. So it definitely does work in terms of recruitment and retention, because we've seen it firsthand.
Yeah. And I think it's not about sort of making everyone into robots so that everyone's talking in exactly the same way. It's about just giving people the tools they need to feel confident about the things they say. Because especially in big organizations, you often find that, one team will sort of talk about the organization in one way and another team might say it in a different way, and it has slightly different nuances. And it's just about getting that consistency so that people just have the resources that they need to express the brand properly and consistently, and that just becomes a powerful thing because it's consistent.
Yeah, and just delivering the same message, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you so much for your time today, Anna. I've loved it. It's been really, really insightful.
Oh, that's okay. You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me to do it.
No problem. And Anna's done some incredible work with us at Hoop. And if you'd like to find out more about Marsden Mee, please connect with Anna Lewis on LinkedIn and look at her website, which is www.marsdenmee.co.uk. And me is with a double E as well. Please subscribe to our podcast, Hoop HR Highlights, on Spotify. And please feel free to share this episode with anyone that you know who may be interested in looking at developing their EVP or their brand. Thanks for listening.